Managed detection and response is the next generation of cybersecurity for organizations, offering 24 hours a day protection for devices, networks, and organizations. But what is it? Managed detection and response takes your traditional antivirus software and adds a multitude of features on top. These include a 24-hour security operations center analyzing the behavioral patterns of users and devices. This means that if something looks suspicious, it's analysed by a team of cybersecurity experts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our security partner ESET has been kind enough to provide us with a video that will walk you through the many benefits of managed detection and response and how it works. Stay tuned.
Yes, I know. I apologize. Another security vendor talking about MDR and why you need it. But bear with me. I promise this will be worth your while. So, as you can see there, I do want to talk to you about why MDR and specifically why ESET MDR. But to get that point across, we first of all need to focus on why XDR. But for us to understand why XDR, we need to talk about this, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So the MITRE ATT&CK framework is a framework of the known techniques that cybercriminals are using to perform reconnaissance on their victims, or get access to victims' networks, or get persistence in those networks, or elevate privileges, or exfiltrate data. For example, they may perform reconnaissance by gathering victim info using publicly available sources such as Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. They may also use those resources to gather information about their victim's organization on Facebook or LinkedIn or X. They may just purchase something on the dark web about their victims, such as some kind of leaked username and password. Or perhaps they'll scan some external services about their victims, such as a website or Exchange server or SharePoint server, etc. Ultimately, the cybercriminal is looking for something that's going to aid them in getting initial access. Now, initial access techniques will be things like phishing, one of the more common ones, or brute forcing, some of those publicly facing services, or using valid credentials that they simply purchased on the dark web, or running some kind of exploit against some of these external services that they previously scanned. Once they get initial access, that is where the game begins. From here, they're looking to achieve persistence and privilege escalation and lateral movement and data exfiltration. They are looking to move from left to right through this framework as quickly and as quietly as possible until they get to data, or impact, I should say. Now, some of the impact techniques that you may have heard of will include things like wiping data, or financial theft, or defacing things like your website, or a network denial of service. But the most common impact technique that you would have heard of is no doubt ransomware. In a huge percentage of cases, this is the impact technique they are looking to achieve. So that is essentially why XDR exists. You're looking to detect these techniques, these left to right techniques, as quickly as possible before they get to impact. So let's take my lab example. Let's say, for example, my reconnaissance technique for my victim was that I simply went onto the dark web and I found some username and passwords for a perimeter firewall for my victim, because my victim was unfortunately a victim of a compromise where their firewall username and passwords were leaked online. So I've just gone and purchased that off an access broker. From there, I connected to their perimeter firewall with said credentials, I created a VPN tunnel with said credentials because I now have the permissions to do that. And from there, I introduced my own attack machine into their network. So from there, I have initial access. I am now in the environment, and that is the starting point for me as the attacker. So here I am in that network. Now, on the machine on the left is my attack machine that I've effectively introduced into their network over a VPN. In the top right is an end user machine. In the bottom right is a server machine. Now, what I want to do is try to scan that end user machine to see if there's any vulnerabilities on that machine that can aid me in one of those techniques like lateral movement or privilege escalation. So to do that, I'm going to connect to a SMB share on the machine from my attack machine. I'm just connecting to the C dollar share. Now from here, I'm going to put something called WinPEs. So WinPEs is it's actually an ethical tool, but a lot of cyber criminals use it because it will scan. In this case, it will scan to the end user's machine and it will look for a load of vulnerabilities on there, such as installed software, some program files paths that are unquoted. It will look for things in the registry that I can exploit as an attacker. Not only will it look for these vulnerabilities, it will also give me, the attacker, a nice little helpful link that may take me to a page that shows me how to exploit that vulnerability. So it's a really key tool for both defenders and attackers. So I've put that on my victim's machine to see if it can help me in any sort of way. But of course, ESET is going to detect that as a threat because that's what ESET perceives it as, a threat. So it removes the file. But that's not the end of my journey as the attacker. Obviously, as the attacker, I may not know that ESET's removed that file until a couple of attempts later when I try to run it. But even so, I'm eventually going to find out that file no longer exists. But what I can do, I could, for example, put onto that victim machine eu.bat, which is just a batch file within itself, not malicious. ESET's not going to detect that as a threat, as you can see. Then on the bottom right machine, I can put a PowerShell script. Again, a PowerShell script within itself is not malicious. And as you can see, ESET's server security or antivirus is not particularly batting an eyelid at what I've just done there. Now from here, I'm going to skip a few and censor a little bit for security reasons. But from here, I'm going to utilize those two files to create a scheduled task and run that scheduled task. And that scheduled task is going to output a list of installed applications on the end user machine in the top right corner, as you can see. So I now have an inventory of all the installed software on that machine. I can open that file, I can see it there, but what I would do as the attacker is I would exfiltrate that file. If you remember, data exfiltration is one of the techniques in that MITRE attack framework. So from my attack machine, I could exfiltrate that file into my attack machine and I can review that file. And yet, still, ESET seemingly has not batted an eyelid. But if we come out of this and go to ESET Inspect, which is ESET's XDR platform, we can see actually that ESET Inspect is starting to light up like a Christmas tree. It's telling us some sort of scheduled script task has been created and started remotely, as a matter of fact. We can see some potential lateral movement detections, some potential suspicious WMI exec remote execution detections. Now, the reason this technique works, by the way, is because of this file here. So if I connect to one of my victims' machines as the defender at the moment, that's what we're looking at here, and I can go to the path where I know the file was put. And in this path, I can see the PowerShell script. Now, this is a main entity of why this particular technique works, because of this PowerShell script here. So I, as the attacker, now that I know this technique effectively works, I could update this PowerShell script as much as I wanted to while keeping the noise quiet. But you, as the defender, you could actually delete this PowerShell script or rename this PowerShell script to stop this particular technique working. Now, this is essentially what MDR is. This little snapshot of what I've shown you here is essentially what MDR is. Using XDR platforms, our MDR team can take a seemingly simple malware detected, malware removed. We can investigate this and go through sometimes a long-winded, complicated process to understand exactly what has happened in the environment, what time it happened, what user accounts have been used, what files have been accessed, what network connections have been made, what legitimate or illegitimate files have been utilized, and try to put this together all for the business to understand. So take, for example, this particular part of the attack chain started off as a malware detected, malware removed. Using ESET's XDR platform, we started to realize or put together that actually this malware came into existence because of a PowerShell script was attempting to download that malware. And then we confirmed that actually that PowerShell script was run because a scheduled task was configured to run that PowerShell script. Then we realized that scheduled task seemed to come into an existence because of a command file that was creating the scheduled task. Then we realized that command file was executed because of a vulnerability in WinRAR, which is an archive utility, a legitimate archive utility that you would often find or could find on Windows computers, but it had a remote code execution vulnerability in it. Using ESET's XDR, we also identified that that RAR file, or that cleverly crafted RAR file, was emailed to our user, and our user opened that file using directly from Outlook, I should say. Now, it might look like we're starting to wrap things up and that all looks very nice and complete, but unfortunately, there is still more we need to understand here. That is not everything. For example, why is what is clearly an internal IP address hosting malware in this environment? Why is an internal file server hosting a PowerShell script that we didn't know was there? How did the attacker have the username and password for what appears to be an admin account when they created the scheduled task? How did the attacker know that the user had a very particular version of WinRAR that had a remote code execution vulnerability in it? All of this seems to suggest some sort of living off the land attack is happening or has happened. Now, according to IBM, cost of a data breach reports, an attacker will spend on average 241 days in a network before being detected and contained. So that means businesses could go 241 days before they realized they have been a victim of data exfiltration or lateral movement or initial access or resource development. In ESET MDR, we, on average, can detect and respond to these techniques within 6 minutes. That's significantly reducing the business's mean time to detect. Here's another stat. 76% of ransomware infections occur outside of working hours, with 49% taking place during the night times and on weekends, or 27% over the weekend. That's why, of course, at ESET, we monitor the environment 24/7, not just 9 to 5, not just when your business hours are operational. We are there 24/7. Christmas, bank holidays, we don't care. We will be there. Essentially, we are taking our 35 years of threat intelligence expertise, human expertise, to do continuous improvement and automation, doing 24/7 SOC monitoring and rapid response. We are using all of our expertise combined to monitor your environment 24/7. So we're trying to take all this noise in your environment, all this noise in the industry, all this telemetry that's going on. We try to consolidate that into one easy to understand notification. This notification will link you to an incident where we're trying to show you exactly the chain of events that happened. For example, from this IP address, they connected to your SQL server. They then seem to use command prompt to call srv.exe and drop it to disk. Here is the user that was being utilized during this attack. If we scroll up the incident further, we can see more information. For example, this user was then utilized, which appears to be a local server user rather than a domain user. That was then utilized to call CMD, which called dc.exe and drop it to disk. Ultimately, we're trying to show you the exact chain of events that happened right before data exfiltration or an attempt to encrypt some data. We will also give you this nice, easy to understand recommended actions about all the entities that were used during this attack. So for example, we can see there the MDR team identified the PowerShell script that was used during this attempted attack. They identified the user that was being used during this attempted attack. Here is another attack I tried. The MDR team detected the data that I tried to exfiltrate. So they've listed it all there. They've listed what tools I utilized to try and exfiltrate the data. They utilized what machine it came from and was going to, and where the data was attempting to be exfiltrated to. So let's look at this in the context of a real life customer. Now, this customer came to us via an MSP because they had reason to believe they had already been hacked. And actually, their security solution was doing seemingly random detections that they didn't understand why this was happening. So this highlighted the need to them to have more visibility and more monitoring of the environment. So this is why they came to us for MDR. Now, approximately a month and a half into their MDR contract, there was a antivirus detection at, I believe it was 11 o'clock at night or something like that. ESET detected the threat and ESET removed the threat. But for whatever reason, our MDR team decided to investigate this threat a little bit further. Now, during this investigation, they did in fact confirm a living off the land attack was happening. They put together this report for the customer, detailing the key parts about the attack. And actually, here is that full report. Now, I'm not going to go into all of this, but I do want to highlight some key parts here. So as you can see, with ESET Protect MDR, we were able to tell the customer or the customer's MSP, here is the compromised user account. Or we were able to tell the customer, here's some new user accounts that the attacker tried to create during the attack. We were also able to tell the customer, here's some sensitive data that the attacker tried to access. So in this case, we saw the attacker was trying to access a file called company name passwords.doc. So it turns out the end user of a machine was storing company passwords on their machine. So that is actionable intelligence for you so far. You can go ahead and you can delete those user accounts that the attacker tried to create as part of their persistence attempt. You can pull the user in for some cybersecurity awareness training to teach them not to save passwords in a Word document. You can give them a password manager. You can teach them how to use the password manager. Moving on, we can see the attacker tried to use a Veeam vulnerability to do a pass the hash attack. We shared that information with the business. So now the business can understand, why do we have Veeam installed? Do we need Veeam installed? Maybe they do. Okay, why do they have Veeam installed that's got a vulnerability from 2023? They need to get this updated. They need to get this patched. They need to improve their patching strategy. This is all actionable intelligence. We also gave them connection to a malicious IPs that the attacker was trying to connect to. So ESET's products will continue to block those malicious IPs, but the business can now go ahead and add those malicious IPs into their firewall, into their VPN server. They could share those IPs with their supply chain if they wanted to, which would perhaps be a good idea to do. And of course, ESET isolated the machine from the network to stop this attack becoming an attack. So business continues its operation. Now, without ESET Protect MDR, yes, the malware would have been detected, and yes, the malware would have been removed, but the adversary still has access to the network, and they still have the opportunity to cause a major incident or a major outage. Now, in the context of this customer that we're talking about, they were all too quick to acknowledge the fact that without ESET MDR, they more than likely would have fallen victim to a major breach, and they would have lost months trying to identify how this happened. They probably wouldn't have had the skills and the resources and the technology to understand why or how this happened. So that is the value proposition of not only ESET Protect MDR, but the entire ecosystem put there to protect you from these key techniques that cyber criminals are using to move from left to right throughout the MITRE attack framework.